Hi, it's Odeean here. Today I've got my Robosapien version 2, which is really an old toy now. I pulled him out of storage. I wanted to play with it, put some new batteries in, and when I did, sadly smoke started emanating from his body and I feared he was about to catch fire. I pulled the batteries out and the batteries were really hot, so there must have been some kind of short circuit in there where the battery is just discharging straight through the wire. Now, he gave a few error messages. His first error message was bad motivator, and then user maybe input error or something like that. And finally, I think once one of these wires must have melted through or been severed, he said brain battery empty, shutting down, because I don't think he was getting any power from the batteries anymore. So you can see I've pulled off his cowling here and revealed this big bundle of mess. It's actually beautiful in its complexity. I don't care about Robosapien that much. I'm tempted to throw him out, but just the sheer amount of love and work that's gone into making him, I don't want him to go to the bin. I want him to work again. So you can see I've started pulling everything off all the way down to the feet here. I'm going to give it a go. Not all of his wires are in bad condition. So looking up, let me try and focus. It's very close. Okay, there we go. Looking up at these, you can see these are still nice and flexible. No insulation problems here. But moving down to some of these wires, you can see that if I bend it, it just starts to crack off in my fingers. Exposing the wires and leading to those short circuits. Now, it's not every wire, it's just all the wires that are in this bundle. So you can see the bundle that runs down his back, through his hip area, down the side of the leg, and seemingly down to where this little board is, where I think it connects to the batteries. So it's just everything in there, and on both sides exactly the same. That's why I think he's savable, just because it's not the whole thing. So I'm going to give it a go. It's really going to be time consuming. I don't have any wire right now. I've got to go and look for the parts I need. My multimeter, actually I broke it just about a month ago, so I need to buy a new multimeter because I'm going to test the continuity of these wires and just pull them out one at a time. But I'm hoping I can get it fixed. And if you're watching this video now, spoiler, then I wouldn't have posted it if I didn't get him to work again. So wait to the end and hopefully you'll be able to see him dance. I pulled off all his cowling and had a look and found straight away a bunch of wires looking like this. Now, this isn't how they are bundled inside the robot because I've already been pulling them out. I'm 2/3 of the way through a repair when I decided to make this video. But basically, I haven't done this to these wires. This is not me stripping wires. This is just really, really shitty insulation on some of the wires that's crumbled off. My first reaction when looking at the wires was, let's just chuck this out. It seems like way too much work. I looked on eBay and YouTube. It turns out I think almost all Robosapien V2s have the same problem. So getting a new one without that problem is pretty much impossible. I also looked around for other robots, comparable sized, equally cool robots to buy, and you know what? I could not find any that one, in the same price range, and two, are as smart as what this guy has been developed. Now, I don't mean smart as in the electronic brain here, the processor, because I know you can hook up computers and like all different kinds of things to these guys and mod them to make them actually more intelligent. But what I mean is the engineering in this guy is really awesome. Now, I'm not reviewing the toy, so I'm not going to go over it one by one, but just to underscore what I'm talking about, look at this hip joint. Now, he's got some serious gears in here and some powerful engines. He can actually stand up once he's fallen over, so he can lift his whole body weight at this joint. But he has a spring wrapped around the joint. So basically, when gravity puts energy into that spring as he falls down or bends too far over, he can recover the energy on the way back up so that his engines don't have to use as much power. And that Like that is, I haven't seen that. There's a lot of hobbyist robots out there which probably have more capabilities than this robot, but that kind of engineering, that impresses me. It's just a way of making the batteries last a lot longer for a start and making him be able to get out of positions that he really shouldn't be able to get out of. Now, if you want to fix a Robosapien V2, it's not actually as hard as it will first seem. So there are 25 wires which are at fault, and replacing 25 wires isn't that much of a big deal. It'll look like a big deal because it's just a spaghetti mess inside there, but once you get doing it, it's just a tedious process. So the first thing that I did was I uncoiled all his wires. He had bundles that were going down here and through. Like this is my new bundle of wires that you can see, but you can see this was what's left of the bundle on the right. I've been removing them one by one. So what I did to get that out was I just snipped them, but I didn't snip them all simultaneously. And the reason I didn't just chop them all straight off is that if I had done that, I would have had to have labeled every single wire and remembered where it goes. Maybe make a spreadsheet or something like that. I didn't want to do that because I don't care what the wires do. I'm just replacing them. So in order to pull them out, I would snip one, unthread it the whole way down, and then you can see here, I just tie it back together. Now, I'm not going to use this wire, so just tying it back together like that is, you know, its only purpose is to keep track of it. It's not to reconnect the wire, so you don't have to make a good connection or anything like that. Just tie it back together, and then pick the next one, snip it in half, pull it out, tie it back together. At the end of that process, what you end up with is a bundle of wires, all still traceable from the point of origin up here all the way down to wherever they terminate at the bottom. So you don't have to label them that way. You can just move them from inside to outside. The next step is to get a bundle. So as I said on the right, there's 13 here and 12 on the other side. So I bundled them all up. Now I used heat shrink, but heat shrink isn't quite flexible enough for this. So you can see I've left big sections of wire there just with its own insulation, because this stuff is much more flexible. I actually bought a 25 meter roll. 25 meters is about the size roll you want, because I think once you measure it out, it's actually 15 meters or so of wire you're going to need in total. Now, I did measure these wires coming down here, and one of these lengths was actually 60 centimeters. I added on 5 or more centimeters just so I would have room to work with. I don't know if that's a good idea. In the end, it might come back to bite me. Maybe it's going to be a bit loose down here, but some of these are flexible. I'm guessing I'll be able to tie them up and keep them out of the way. So anyway, once you've fed that up through the hole, the next thing you want to do is just start replacing the wires one by one. Now, in order to do that, you need to pick a spot to work. Like you can see, for me, this is the next wire that I'm working on up here. I can just focus on it. This guy right here. So this is continuous. There's a continuity of this wire all the way down to the end, because remember I told you I tied them together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my scissors and snip. Okay, so I have just created a loose end of wire up here. Now I'm not going to pull that right out, and one of the reasons is that on the plugs there's some silicone, and screw that. The real reason I'm not going to pull it out is it will be so much harder to reconnect these wires if you're really pulling them all out. So what I'm going to do is just find where that wire goes, and here's the other end of that wire that I snipped. It comes down to this section here, and if I follow it around, you can see that's where it ends there. I'm going to grab my scissors and I'm going to snip this one too. So I'm just going to pull out this length, which I no longer need, and chuck it in the bin. Now normally to remove the coating on this wire would be you'd need wire strippers, and I do have wire strippers, but it's so crumbly that I found the best way to do it is just crush it. So like, it's a bit hard to do this with one hand while I'm on camera, but I've just crushed all that off, And as I twisted in my fingers to just make the strands all stick together, you can see that any insulation that was there just flaked right off. The next thing is to just pick a wire, any wire from your bundle. So I'm going to pick this one. And sorry about my arm being in the way here. It's just a little bit hard to show intricate things with one hand. Grab a piece of heat shrink that you will have already pre-cut to a reasonable length and just feed it onto the wire. So it's very tricky to do this in one hand, but for you, much more easy. So there we go. Now we're not going to shrink that on. This is not how we're reconnecting it. We're actually going to twist these together here and then solder it on. Before we do that though, what we want to do is grab our multimeter, hook it up to the end of this wire, which I just did, and find the other end. So again, just using the multimeter saves us from having to actually label these wires, because labeling every wire would be a major pain in the ass, especially considering they're all red. So you can see I found it there. This is the one. So we're going to pull this guy out and pop some heat shrink on him as well to identify him. So I just did it off camera because there's no way I could do that with one hand. Now I've just chosen to use yellow for the his left side and blue for his right, just so I could keep track of things, but you could do whatever you want. If you really wanted to, you could individually code these wires, but it honestly makes no difference. Now I'm no expert. In fact, my soldering is really shit. You don't have to be. You can see that that is connected. That's good enough. So now I'm going to pull the heat shrink over it and seal it on. Now the last thing you want to do is cook the electronics. So you can see I've made a shield of aluminium foil around the heat shrink, and then just give it a few bursts of flame and it's sucked on. Whew. I have finished. It's been many hours. You can see my two neat bundles there going down to the feet, everything accounted for. This Robosapien is ready to have his power switch flipped. Alright, I got all the things back together. When I turned him on, this is what I hear.
So I think I have a bad motivator.
Now, there's no smoke, and I've been able to get it to go away by playing with these connectors in here. So what I'm guessing is that there might be a tiny bit of overlap, maybe a hair of one of these wires is touching its wrong terminal. So what I'm going to do now is get something sharp and just separate all that goo, the old silicon, away from the wires. Make sure that there's clean ends on these things, and then put some new silicon over, just so to ensure that the insulation is really between the wires at the ends. You can see in here I've sealed off these wires. I individually tested each one. After that, he kept saying I have a bad motivator. So what I did then was I checked that we could make a circuit between, like, these are the actual motivators for the lower legs, the engines, the electrical engines. So I checked their path all the way down to the engines and they were fine. His power comes in here. So I checked there was no crossover on his power. His power was fine. The last thing I think that is causing the problem is this. So you can see that the arm, the weight can hang off this plug, and I think this has received some kind of damage, because if I turn him on
Sub-user error.
and get this just right, this area is what's screwing him up. So I need to pull those out, make sure they're connected properly, and maybe just seal them back in there. So that's what I'm going to do now. Still got problems. I can't figure out exactly where it is. I think it's somewhere in that arm, and it's causing him to go a little bit haywire. but I'm confident that it is not in the legs. If I can just stay still for a minute, because his legs are working fine. Alright, let's go back the other way. I mean, you can see he's got a mind of his own now. It just goes a little bit nuts. At first I thought it's this light shining on his head, but no, even if I tape around his head to cover up the sensor, he still wants to do random things. So definitely I think it's caused by some kind of short, but I just haven't been able to find it yet. Okay, I've put Robosapien V2 all the way back together now. Look, he still has something a little bit wrong with him. I didn't want to pull those cables out in his forearms, which is where I've pretty much isolated the problem to. It's just too hard. Sometimes a little bit of wiggle will get it to work again. So at the moment, until that 100% fails, I'm not going to do that. But let's turn him on.
So I think I have a bad motivator.
And that's basically him explaining what's wrong with him. And sometimes he'll say user error. And user error is the worst message because he won't do anything after that. But a bit of fiddling and he goes back to normal. So let's just see if he's going to respond. Yep, I press the stop button. He goes, ooh. Let's see if he can still get down on the ground. Alright, he's gone to have a rest. It's pretty hard to achieve that. That's good, he's working fine. Let's tell him to dance.
I need to be upright for this.
Now, if anything's going to fail, it's that. Alright, that's hardcore robot action standing up from the ground. Awesome.
Nobody saw that.
Okay, let's see if his light tracking ability still works. So I'm going to shine this in front of him.
Target acquired.
He can walk. He can see. That's awesome. Okay, stop. Stop. Let's see if he can obey my backwards command, because if his legs are screwed, he may not be able to walk backwards. He's trying. The problem is not... Oh, wait a minute. I'm pushing it the wrong way. The floor in here is a bit too slippery, so he's shuffling without actually doing anything. Right. That's not his fault. That's just the floor. That's one of the shortcomings of the way he shuffles walking. Let's check out his arms, because that dodgy wire might affect his arms. I don't know. See, it goes away. It really is in the arm, because that's... Before I made this video, he wouldn't work at all, and I had to play with that wire, his arm wire. So there's some kind of short in that arm that I was just moving. But right now, it's not affecting him at all. So I would say my repair of Robosapien is, for all intents and purposes, 100% successful. To sum up, I am so pleased to be able to fix this. Robosapien is... He's really got a lot of personality. He says a lot of cool stuff. You can control him. I mean, he's got maybe not as much articulation as what would be awesome. But I just want to lay out the tools that I needed to do this. So if you're going to do it, you need to at least get this amount of stuff, but really nothing more. So on the left here, I've got just a ordinary cheap soldering iron. Now, I also got some lead-free solder, which I don't know, I put somewhere else at the moment, but you can get that anywhere. And considering this is a kid's toy, you better use lead-free because you don't want to give your children brain damage. I've got some wire. Now, initially I thought that this wire wasn't going to be thick enough because the core, it seemed too thin. Now, I had thought I'm needing 0.5 millimeter thick core, and this said it was less, but you know, it turned out it was perfectly fine, and I think it's the same as what it was used internally. The insulation on this is actually a little bit thicker than the insulation on his internal wires, so it should be more durable, and it also feels more flexible. So this is like, I think they called it hookup wire. I got it from an auto repair shop. Wasn't that, it's like $5, very cheap. I needed one medium-sized Phillips head screwdriver. I think this is about 5 millimeters, 4 or 5 millimeters in diameter. This is almost every screw in his whole body, except for 4, takes this size screw. So you definitely need that. Now after that, you're going to need a tiny little Phillips head screwdriver. This one looks like about 3 millimeters, 3 millimeters. No, not 2, definitely 3. The only places that's needed are in these knees. So there's 2 screws here, 2 screws here, and these are actually floating knee pads. But on the inside, there's 2 steel pins which connect the top and bottom half of the leg rather, and just stop the articulation going out of control. And the only small screws are in that location. The next thing I've got is a dirt cheap multimeter. Let's turn it on here. Now, primarily I use the multimeter just for finding the ends of wires, so I know which wire goes where, and that's because all my wires are red. So without color coding, you need to be able to measure which wire is which. To do that, I just use the continuity setting here, which basically all that means is that when there's a circuit, you get a noise like that, so you know you've hit the right spot. Now, I also, when I was trying to find out what's wrong with him, just was trying to trace the power through this. You can flip it around to voltage, and I was making sure that the voltages across the power terminals were right, and they were correct, so that came in very handy. Next, I have just some small size clip ties to help me with those bundles at the very end. I did use heat shrink to organize them, but these just help me guide them into the right places within the cavity here, just so that they wouldn't be pinched when I joined the shells back together. I did have a wire stripper. You're going to need a wire stripper. Not everyone has a wire stripper, but you definitely need it. You can see this is ancient. Look how rusty it is. I've been using this for 15, 20 years. That was pretty much to strip the new wires. The old wires just crumbled. Didn't need any assistance with that. I have a sharp pair of scissors and just a few alligator clips. Oh, and I mentioned it, but the heat shrink as well, and just a little torch to heat that up with. Now, don't go crazy with the torch. You can permanently wreck things with this torch, and as I said, I used foil to shield delicate parts from the flame, and you don't need more than like a second burst on this heat shrink. If you overdo it, you're just going to catch things on fire or melt them, so spare the flame. It's probably the most dangerous thing here. So that's the end of my video. I'd like to thank Wowwee for getting really crap Chinese wiring and making me have to do this. But all kidding aside, this is an awesome robot, and I really do want to thank Wowwee for making it. I know there's a QC issue and a lot of people are affected by it, but at the end of the day, there's nothing else that competes with this, I think, just for toys. I mean, you know, you can get more expensive stuff. I would love it if they make another one. Now, I know they had a more high-end version of this, had some kind of monitor in his stomach, but I think it was...
Hey, where did it go?
Yeah, shut up. I think it was basically the same robot with something added. I might try and pick that up. I don't know what it was called, and I haven't seen it. I haven't been looking on the internet. I just saw it in the shop when it was out, maybe 10 years ago. After I turn this video off now, I'm going to go and have a little look on eBay and see if that is still a thing you can buy. Alright, that's my video. Thanks for watching. I'm odeean. See you next time.